Hey, so just wanted to make a video because I'm building my Camaro, and I'm going back in with it with a Gen 3 block. My Camaro is a 5th gen Camaro. So it came with the 6.2 liter LS3, which is a Gen 4 engine, and there's a lot of videos out there and stuff where people are showing you how to build the LS, but they don't really give you the info you need for putting a Gen 3 into a Gen 4. There's a lot of info out there for Gen 4 engines into a Gen 3, but there's not a whole lot of info for doing a Gen 3 into a Gen 4 engine. And I mean, it's as far as I know, it's possible to do. They're basically the same motor, but I just wanted to show you guys some things that I found between the two of them while I've been trying to plan out my swap and everything like that. So basically, my Gen 3 motor is an LQ4 6.0 liter. We pulled it out of a junkyard, Denali, sent it to the machine shop, had it cleaned up, and ran through. It got bored 30 over, and so that's what we're going to go back in with. So yeah, the 6.0 is what we're going to go back in with. It's an iron block, so it's going to be able to handle a lot more power. The car is boosted, and it's going to stay boosted, so it'll be beneficial because it's going to get a forged rotating assembly, so it's going to be able to handle the power this time. And originally, I mean, like I said, it wasn't that the LS3 couldn't handle the boost and everything. It was boosted for a year and a half, but we just ended up losing an injector and melting that piston, which is what sent it out. So I guess now I'm going to show you guys the differences between the two blocks, and then kind of give you a rundown on what I've found with putting the Gen 3 into my Gen 4 car. Alright, so we got our Gen 3 motor here, our Gen 4 motor here, which, I mean, they're both all torn apart because that was the LS3 that I blew up, and this is the one that's going to go back in with it. So, I mean, for the most part, as you can see, I mean, timing cover, water pump, all that stuff, same deal. Timing cover shape, water pump, cam cover, same thing. One of the differences you have is this is a 1 bolt, so this hole here just takes a single bolt to hold the cam gear on. Your Gen 3s came with 3 bolt cams, so basically the cam had 3 bolts, and so, I mean, people say that's a good upgrade because, I mean, when your motor starts pushing power, and I mean, even the ones that don't really push power, they say just because there's 1 bolt and there's just this dowel holding the cam gear, it can shear off and cause problems. So people say it's a good idea to upgrade to that 3 bolt cam gear. And then the other big difference being on this motor, you have your cam sensor here. So your Gen 3 cam would usually have teeth on the back of the cam, and your cam sensor would go down in here to read the cam position. The Gen 4, the cam sensor is on the timing cover, so your cam gear on here reads, it's got its little metal steps on the cam gear, so it can read off the timing cover here. And then another thing about the different swaps that people that's all over the internet, you can put a Gen 4 cam into a Gen 3. All you have to do is get that Gen 4 cam gear, Gen 4 timing cover, and you're good to go, and then you just have to extend your harness and stuff to meet up here. Gen 4 motor cannot take a Gen 3 cam because, like I said, you have this hole up here for this cam sensor, but the Gen 4 block doesn't. Let's see, just closed up. So that's the differences, I guess, with the camshafts. Another big difference is these 2 holes here are your knock sensors. So that's one of the biggest ways to tell a Gen 3 from a Gen 4 is you'll have your cover here, and it's got the 2 holes for the wires to go through to these knock sensors. On this one, it doesn't have that, and the reason for that is if you see these holes, this is for the active fuel management system. If your car has it, oil pressure hits these to control the lifters and stuff, to shut them off or turn them on. This one being an LS3, it didn't have AFM like the L99, so the cover on this just has O-rings, and the O-rings just cap these, not allowing anything to go through. Another difference is the oil pressure sensor. So oil pressure sensor sits here on this car, or not this car, this motor, and usually it'll thread in, and it's about this tall, and an electrical connector up top. This one, as you can see, still get oil pressure from the back of the block for the sensor, but it doesn't thread in here. When you throw the cover on, it's got an O-ring here and then the step up for the sensor, so the sensor actually threads into the 4th gen cover. They do use the same thread, I found, so the 4th gen sensor will thread into here because they have different connectors. I'm not really sure how I'm gonna go about that yet. I'm thinking I might just get a pipe with the same internal threads as this and external, so thread it into here and then thread the sensor on top, because like I said, they do have different electrical connectors. And I was hoping I might have been able to use the 3rd gen sensor instead and just maybe change my wiring, but I think the 3rd gen sensor is a 1-wire plug or a 2-wire, whereas the 4th gen sensor is a 3-wire, so it just wouldn't work, being that I'm keeping the 4th gen PCM and everything like that. So that's a big thing to, I guess, look into. Another difference is, if you see here, the block is just flat, nothing going on there. On the 4th gen, you have your alternator bolt here. So basically a stud goes into here that far, and your alternator bracket will hang off that. So when you do put a 3rd gen into your 4th gen, you have to tap this out for that stud so you can add it into there. It does have another hole, which I think, if I remember right, is this one. So that's your alternator bracket right there, boom, boom, boom. But on here, that casting isn't there for this, so that is, I guess, not really a downfall, because apparently just having these two in there is enough support for the alternator bracket, but you do lose that 3rd bolt. Let's see, another one being then, oh, and back to the beginning where I told you guys the knock sensors in the valley. On your 4th gen, they're on the side of the block. This is your knock sensor. It's just sitting here because I didn't want to lose it, but that's your knock sensor. On the 4th gen, they sit right there where that hole is. So on the side of the block, down there is where those sit, and so that's an issue you run into. And now I don't know why they don't make, I mean, they might, but I've looked and I've looked and I haven't been able to find anything. I don't know why they don't make kits for the 3rd gen motor to be able to run those 4th gen sensors. So basically, if you were doing a 4th gen motor into a 3rd gen car, they make these extenders you plug into the sides of the block. So it still uses the original sensors. You plug into the sides of the block and it extends it back up to the harness up here, so you can plug into your original harness. Now, like I said, 3rd gen into a 4th gen, they don't really do anything like that. So what I've seen on some of the forums and some of the our one YouTube video, and I'm planning on doing this myself, at least hoping to, is the guy had engine mounts, but his were a 3-bolt engine mount. He put his knock sensor here. So he had his 3 bolts there for his engine mount, and then put his knock sensor on the fourth one on both sides. So that's what I'm thinking of doing, planning on doing at least, because it seems to be the only way really that the sensor would still sit back where it used to sit originally. Hey, sorry if this isn't flowing too well. It's my first YouTube video and I'm trying to explain this stuff the best I can. Here I actually pulled the covers out of the parts pile I have between the 2 motors, so I just want to show you guys some of the differences. So this one is obviously your Gen 3 cover, sits down in there like that. You got your knock sensors down in there, which this is a 3rd gen knock sensor, so sits in there, screws in on both sides, has the harnesses ran to it. Oh, the connectors broke off, so they look a little different obviously because the connector should be there. But yeah, that's the difference between those two, 3rd gen, 4th gen knock sensor. Here is the 4th gen oil pressure sensor and the 4th gen valley cover. So as you can see, this is just like a oil separator for the PCV. But like I told you, here's your AFM gaskets and stuff, and then your oil pressure back here. So this one sits in there like that, has bolts up or whatever, and then like I said, you have your step up here, and that's where originally this threaded into, like that. But on this block it's hiding back here, but this sensor will still thread into here, still has the same threads. So you would just kind of have to figure out how to, you might just be able to screw this in right there, you know, all the way down and run your wire. I'm not for sure yet because the motor isn't back in the car, or you might have to get something to step that up. Another difference is, if you see here, you have your breather coming off the cover. The 3rd gen cover doesn't, at least for the LQ4. One of the 3rd gen covers that does have that breather, if you need it, like I do, I'm going to need it because the car's boosted, so I need to make sure the bottom end's breathing good. The LS2, I believe, has that breather coming off it. So same style cover for, meaning like you have your knock sensor stuff here, but it has that breather coming off. Now what I'm thinking of doing, because obviously you can see how this stuff goes together, I'm thinking of slapping this 3rd gen cover, or 4th gen cover, onto here, because it literally sits in the same spot. I mean, obviously we have the oil pressure issue here, and then the cam sensor down there. So what my plan is to actually, because if you look, all the bolt holes, they line up. So same, it swaps across, it's just you have the issue of this stuff. Now I'm going in with a 4th gen motor, so I'm not too worried about keeping that stuff, or going in with a 3rd gen motor, so I'm not too worried about keeping this stuff. So I'm actually thinking about getting the 3rd gen gasket, laying it on here and tracing it on the back, and then cutting away the stuff I don't need. That way I can run my 4th gen cover, because I mean, I'm not going to be using those knock sensors, so I don't need to be worrying about that. So cut that away, flatter cover, don't have to deal with the holes, and I have my breather. So that's my plan for the valley cover. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to show you. I guess another difference would be the crankshafts. Supposedly the crankshaft swap across, your 4th gens can fit into your 3rd gens. They have the same main journals, connecting rod size and all that, so you can swap a 3rd gen crank into a 4th gen and a 4th gen crank into a 3rd gen. Now the only difference you run into is your crank sensor wheel, your reluctor wheel. This is the one out of my Camaro. It's in pretty not bad shape, but it did get hit when the car blew up. It got some metal caught in there, if you can see that tooth that's bent. But this is your 4th gen wheel. So let's see, I have a 3rd gen crank in here in my office. So you got your 3rd gen crank. If you see, you can see the teeth difference down there. So that's your 3rd gen crank, sensor wheel and crank. And this is the 4th gen. This is my LS3 crank. It actually wasn't beat up somehow, so sent it to the machine shop, had them check it over. They said my journals are good, and it checked out and everything, so they just polished it and sent it back to me, and that's our 4th gen wheel on there. Now the wheels do fit across. So you could also just swap your wheels. So if you were wanting to do this swap, and instead of having to source a 4th gen crank, you can just take it to your machine shop, just like they did this one. They'll heat the ring and slip it off, and well, this is if you have the 24 tooth. So if you have the 24 tooth, they would heat the ring and slip it off, and then just you get one of these. They have a special tool that puts it right where it needs to be on the crank for timing purposes. And with that one, they heat the ring up and just press it back on, and you're good to go. Slap the crank back in and it'll read. But one of the other things too is, let's say you just had someone give you a 3rd gen block, and you had a 4th gen crank laying around, and you wanted to throw the 4th gen crank in, but your car, whatever you're working on, has a 3rd gen motor in it. What you would do there is you would slap the crank in. You would change the crank sensor, because they are different. One's black, one's gray, I think, are the 2 colors. So you'd have to change it to the crank sensor for the 4th gen. But then there's companies out there that sell a box that you can plug into between your crank sensor and the 3rd gen harness, and it basically takes the counts from the 4th gen reluctor wheel and converts them into 24x, so the car can still read it. So you can use a 4th gen crank in your 3rd gen motor. You would just have to get that box to convert the stuff. Let me see, I don't think there's really anything else I'm missing. The oil pumps will work between the 2. Obviously you got heads. So your 3rd gen motors are cathedral port, which I can grab my heads to show you guys that real quick. Okay, so here's the 2 different style of heads. We got 706s here, cathedral ports off of 5.3. These are 821s, which is the same as an 823. Just it's got wider valves in it and stuff, because it was on the LS3. So as you can see, you got your cathedral port and your square port. Your square ports flow better, but they are 4th gen heads. Supposedly your 4th gen heads will fit on this motor. These ones being 821s, they have to have a minimum of a 4-inch bore. So you couldn't swap 821s onto like your 5.3 or something like that, because the bore is too small, but they will work on a 6.0 and up. And then obviously you have your 6.0 cathedral port heads, which are 317s. I could have ran those, but the issue is I have the Camaro, so I would have to get the LS2 intake to drop the height of the intake manifold, and then I'd have to get obviously I'm still gonna have to get a retune, but that would have changed the way the tune is, because they don't flow as well as the square port heads. And so I already have the stuff for these heads. Obviously I have the LS3 intake, my injector rails and all that. The only issue is I have to get a new set of heads. I was hoping to reuse these ones, but as you can see, that cylinder got all messed up. when the piston let go. So gonna have to get a new set of heads. But yes, those, your Gen 4 heads will fit on your Gen 3 block. And I mean even the other way around too, your Gen 3 heads will fit on your Gen 4 block. It just depends on what setup I guess you're wanting to do. Past that, I think that's honestly all the info I was hoping to give. I know there's other videos out there. I know Summit just released a video of the differences between the Gen 4 and Gen 3, but they didn't really talk about what would go into swapping the two. And like I said, there's a lot of info for doing a Gen 4 into a Gen 3, but there's not a lot of info for doing a Gen 3 into a Gen 4. So I just wanted to give you guys my experience on that. I mean, obviously the motor isn't done yet. I am thinking about recording myself putting the motor back together, because the forge assembly that I'm going back in with is the Summit Pro Series, LS Pro Series, which is, they're pretty new, but supposedly they're 1200 horsepower capable. So I'm thinking about, I mean, not thinking, I already got the pistons and rods for it, so I'm not thinking about it. I am going back together with those. So I haven't seen a YouTube series yet where someone has built their motor with that, showed the power they've made with those. So I'm thinking about showing that to you guys. And then obviously probably show you guys how to put the Camaro back together, because there's a lot of video, I mean there's a few videos out there on how to do a 5th gen Camaro motor swap, but the camera is always super far away from it, or they just don't give you very good detail. I'm not sure if I'm gonna record that stuff yet, but I think I am. But yeah, just wanted to give you guys some info on the differences between that. So if there is anyone out there that's struggling like me with trying to figure out what you need to put your 3rd gen into a 4th gen car, that's what I found. Obviously as I go back together with the car, I'll maybe figure out some more stuff, but for now that's what I found. So hopefully it helps you out. Thanks guys.